Again, welcome everyone. My name is Justin Chugg, and today we're going to talk about how to generate appointments using weather reports. And the purpose behind this call is to help companies implement disaster recovery or business continuity strategies, which a lot of times they're reluctant to do, or maybe they think they have one, or it's not top of mind. And so really we want to figure out how to enable us to have influence over businesses and prospects and clients in order to adopt these types of services. Before we get started, though, I just wanted to recommend some homework for everyone. In the future weeks, we'll have two guest speakers who will be sharing some thoughts with us from their books, particularly The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papson, and Smart Cuts by Shane Snow. A lot of you have probably read these books before, but if you haven't, I think it would be very helpful for the discussion that we'll have with these authors here in the next few weeks. But let's go ahead and get started. Before we talk about the strategy, I just wanted to provide some background and some context to today's discussion and help you understand the impact that weather has on downtime. Now, 80% of all downtime can be attributed to two things. It's either a hardware failure or a power outage. Hardware failures are attributed to about 45% of the outages, and 35% are due to power outages. Now, the causes of these two instances can be broken down into three areas. 45% is operational, 36% is natural disasters, and 19% is human error. So if we look at the overall scope, a third of all downtime or outages can be attributed to natural disasters. And the scope or the frequency of these events can be explained in this next slide, which basically talks about the fact that about 40% of all businesses have experienced downtime in the past 12 months. And of those that have experienced downtime, only 2% were able to recover within an hour. And about 54% experienced that outage for more than 8 hours. Now, Sable has a server farm hosted with Azure, and we actually experienced an outage just last month. So one of the data centers where we host our server farm had a direct lightning strike, and it ended up taking down the cooling systems, which then caused the engineers to shut down all the machines. And so we were down for only a few hours. But it's a good example of how even when events outside of our office space can impact our businesses. As far as cost goes, if we look at the average cost per incident, and a lot of us have seen these stats before, but it's about $807,000 per incident. And it can range anywhere between $926 per minute to $17,244 per minute. Now, the frequency of these events and the cost from a macro level, if you're looking at the screen right now, you can see that there's, over the past decade, there's a sharp increase in terms of economic impact and costs associated with disasters. There's a huge spike within the past few decades. And the main reason behind this spike is the frequency of disasters is actually increasing significantly. And this is what this next graph basically spells out, is how frequently, due to global warming and other factors, that the cost and the frequency of disasters are spiking incredibly. And so this should paint a picture for us as sales consultants to really go out there and help clients to be better prepared, because if these trends continue as they are, there's going to be major impacts for their business. So the question is, how do we convince companies to actually apply business continuity? How do we get their attention? How do we influence them? And one of the best strategies that I've discovered and come across in terms of helping companies adopt these types of services is using the model that we talked about in the past with referral partners and lead exchanges. And there's a member of your lead exchange that will help you implement business continuity better than anyone else, and that's a business insurance broker. And so the insurance broker, basically their job is to ensure that everyone has all the necessary coverage for their business. And so oftentimes they're at the very hub or crossroads of a lot of sales opportunities. new businesses, new offices, expansions, acquisitions, and they're usually the second phone call. The first phone call would be to the fire department, but the second one would be to their insurance broker to figure out what to do next. And in companies in those types of scenarios is like selling to an individual in the desert who's dying of thirst, selling them lemonade. And so when you're working with these property insurance brokers, it creates a really amazing opportunity to come across sales and deals that you normally wouldn't have a chance to get in front of. But like all referral relationships, we want to make sure that this is a two-way street. And it can't be based off of a monetary or any type of commissions, because that's somewhat of a shallow type of relationship. It's just not that functional. And so in order to make this a strategic two-way relationship, we want to focus on one aspect of the company's offerings, which is a business interruption insurance. Now, the insurance brokers for commercial businesses offer this as an addendum. It's never a primary insurance or a standalone insurance, but it's always an add-on service. And the difference between traditional property insurance and business interruption insurance is that business interruption insurance is basically it covers any cost associated with the downtime related to a natural disaster. And so if there's a loss of profits, then they would basically cover those costs. And so the idea here is that this will allow us to basically work alongside with the commercial insurance broker in helping them reduce their risks with their clients. And so what you're going to do is you're going to align yourself with some of these brokers and implement a business continuity strategy for their clients. So whether companies are using business interruption insurance or not, they should be using this platform and adopting business interruption insurance with business continuity best practices. And so you would basically create a checklist of items to go through and work with their clients in order to reduce the risks that the commercial insurance broker has with each of their clients. Because if you can reduce the downtime by implementing a good business continuity strategy, they can lower their premiums to their clients. And also, when you're implementing business continuity strategies, you're oftentimes taking physical equipment out of their office, which is part of what business continuity does. And so less physical equipment in the office also reduces their traditional business insurance because there's less to insure. Now, as far as implementing this strategy, a good methodology would be what we talked about a few weeks back on volunteerism. Volunteerism is probably the most effective way to communicate and help companies adopt this type of business insurance across different sectors. So what you want to do in terms of action items, you want to make sure that you're subscribing to weather.com to get weather alerts. You can also subscribe to outages with your local electric companies to figure out which regions are being affected by that. You can also use upsellreport.com to show you historical data on outages and disasters affecting each of your customers or prospects' locations. Another great resource is floodtools.com, which basically shows you which businesses in the area are most at risk for flood. And again, flooding is not one of the areas that your insurance companies are going to cover. You can also sync up with downdetector.com, which will keep you posted on vendor outages like the one that we experienced with Azure last month. Also, Google Alerts is a great resource to look at news reports highlighting businesses that have been affected by disasters using specific types of keywords. And so these are different areas that you can sync up with and use these as timing elements to implement your volunteerism strategy. So if you're not familiar with the volunteerism, it's a type of sales strategy where you dedicate 10% of your month to helping companies on a volunteer basis. So a lot of times there's companies that are lacking internal IT support or the knowledge base to actually implement a lot of these strategies in terms of business continuity. And so you volunteer your expertise and time. It's kind of like a CIO for a day to come in and help them figure out how to do this. Also, if you're subscribed to Ensable, you'll get all of these reports in your daily Pareto. and the natural disasters and the vendor updates which will keep you synced up with any events that are relevant to the companies that you're following. Now, in terms of targets, it's most effective if we talk to human resources in terms of selling some of these strategies. The reason being is when people can't show up to the office, for instance, when it snows in Atlanta, there are certain laws and consequences that HR that needs to be aware of. And there's three particular industries that are most affected by this, which is hotel, restaurants, and retail. Now, restaurants and hotels are obligated to pay their non-exempt employees, or basically their hourly, lower-level employees, at least 2 hours of work if they show up and have to go home because of an outage. If you're in the retail space, it's double. So you're basically expected to pay for 4 hours of work for non-exempt employees. Now, exempt employees, on the other hand, which are basically anyone that's in the managerial, administrative, or professional position, regardless of whether they're salary or hourly, you're expected to pay them a full day's wage if they come into work and are not able to finish their hours due to some type of an outage. And so HR has a lot of responsibility in terms of managing these issues. And for them, keeping things up and running, talking about business insurance, these are great discussions to have with them, and they tend to be a much easier target rather than talking to the IT department, which isn't necessarily concerned about whether or not somebody gets paid at the end of the day. They're just trying to keep their systems up and running. So next week, or I should say in 2 weeks, what we're going to talk about is the continuation of today's discussion is what does a good business continuity plan look like? What type of checklist should you bring to your clients when you're working with them? And so